Hello, everyone, and welcome to this panel, Fiction That Resonates. My name is Jen Jumba, and I am the Popular Department Manager at Cleveland Public Library Main Campus, and I'll be your moderator. Besides wanting to sing the name of my department, Popular, a la Wicked, what this really means is I have books that have been published in the last 2 years before they're sent to the respective departments here at Main Library. And this panel highlights literary fiction that reflects human complexity and emotional depth, stories that resonate long after readers put the book down. And I am so thrilled to welcome our authors. Edwidge Danticat with Day from Knopf. Andrew Sean Greer, Villa Coco, Doubleday. And Ruth Ozeki, the typing lady from Viking. As librarians, we often have patrons wandering in our library and in our stacks looking for a great book to read. And after a few questions, we learn what they like to read and what they're in the mood for. We become advocates for your books, finding just the right reader. So assuming we found the right reader for your book, Ms. Danticat, how would you introduce this book to that reader?
Well, I would first of all thank the reader for reading, for for reading all our books. I would say it's a book about a woman who survives a very tragic event and then just rearranges her whole life trying to understand it. I think the tragic event is a mass shooting, which is something that many of us can will recognize as having almost become too much of a daily occurrence. But primarily, she uh, calls from her community, from her family, and tries to recover from that. So it's a book that begins with a tragedy, but to bear a cliche, ends with hope.
Yes, agreed. It is a harrowing opening scene for sure. Mr. Greer, how would you introduce Villa Coco?
Well, I'm sure every librarian has a reader who comes in these days and says, please take me away from everything. Um, but don't give me, I don't want a silly book. I want it to be beautiful but I don't want it to tear me apart. I can't take it anymore. Um, Take me to some other world. And so I tried to write that kind of book basically for myself to do that. About a young man in the 90s who takes a job working for a 92-year-old baronessa in the wilds of Tuscany in a very chaotic environment. And I think that comedy can be a way to try to get at some harder things, but leave you maybe like Edwidge's book with a sense of hope, which is what it's can be nice to come out of a book with.
Agreed. I mean, I think we all read for different reasons, and lately it seems that we're reading to escape. And so having some humor mixed amongst tragedy, is always a good thing to turn to. Ms. Ozeki, the typing lady, this
Yes,
beautiful
yes.
collection of short stories.
Well, if the reader, this hypothetical reader, knows my novels, then they kind of know what to expect, and they might even recognize the character of the typing lady from the novel *The Book of Form and Emptiness*. She's a minor character there. And if they are not familiar with my work, then I would explain that Ruth Ozeki is known for. I feel like I'm always speaking of myself in the third person. Ruth Ozeki is known for writing these long, layered novels that can make you laugh and cry on the same page. And I didn't make that up. Some very nice person said that. The Typing Lady is my first short story collection, and I think that these stories capture some of the same quality of the novels. Some of them are longer, a little bit more like novellas than short stories. The characters are quite different. They span different ages. Some of them are young, some of them are middle-aged, some are older. For example, there's a college student who falls madly in love with her professor and then tries to make sense of this relationship years later. There's a husband who watches the ghost of his wife's ambitions haunt the woods behind their house. There's a curious grandmother who who creates a fake dating profile to spy on her granddaughter's romantic life. I mean, like what could possibly go wrong? And all of the characters are trying to understand their lives and trying to find meaning through the stories that they tell. So the Typing Lady, I think, in general, is about how our memories become stories and about how loss can make us stronger.
It's a beautiful way to explain it. And I will say that, for somebody who might not have heard of your books, it is a wonderful introduction. And at the same time, we have patrons who come in and say, where's the latest Ruth Ozeki book? Or where's the latest book from Andy or Edwidge? It's just a wonderful privilege to be able to connect books and readers. So I wanted to say thank you. All the books you described are a little bit different. You have one set in the 90s, in Tuscany in this, remote, chaotic area. You have one set down in Florida, and then, the short stories. But yet there's the common themes that seem to connect all of these books. And one of the things that I was thinking about is I see a lot in these stories about courage, about honesty, and about responsibility, and even that sense of connection. So if we were to look at your main characters and how they reflect these values during the course of their journey, will you talk a little bit about, and we'll start with Ms. Danticat, thinking about Magnolia and the opening scene, how do we see courage, honesty, and responsibility show up in her actions afterwards?
So Magnolia is a first generation American realtor in Florida, where I happen to be right now, and in a very gentrifying neighborhood. And Magnolia is in the mall the day that that's when the story opens, when a mass shooter is trying to actually reach the location where she takes shelter, and that's where the scene opens. And I think, I haven't actually, the story was inspired by a fake mass shooting that some kids had set up in the mall that I thought I was in a mass shooting. And so I'd had that feeling of being with a bunch of strangers who can suddenly become your closest friends. And because you all think you're trying to survive, and in some cases, people are trying to survive something together. So I think you see the best of humanity in those moments. I've also seen that when you have an emergency landing on a plane, where you're suddenly like holding tightly to the hand of the person next to you. I think, for thankfully, if we're being optimistic, people really display their best qualities in moments of urgency when they're caught in a tragedy together. And so I think that shows up. It's sort of like people in extremis, in this extreme circumstances, coming together and trying to survive.
Agreed. Trauma has a way of really bonding people in a very short period of time, and certainly courageous in terms of how they're working together to survive that situation. Mr. Greer, we meet your main character, Giovetti. He's at a train station in Italy. Can you talk about how courage and honesty or responsibility appear throughout his story, um, or an example of one of these?
Sure. Because it's a comedy, there's a lack of all of these things in a lot of the characters. I think it takes courage to stand up to a 92-year-old Baronessa, which it takes him a little while to do so. And when he does, of course, she's impressed by that. Tough people like when you're tough with them in return. Honesty, there's very little. It's a story of storytellers, liars, and thieves, which means when you do get a glimpse of the truth, I hope it's moving when one of these storytellers finally tells you something that feels like it's true and is vulnerable and doesn't show them in the best light. Um, responsibility is it turns out my protagonist, Jovadi, doesn't really know what his job is when he arrives there. And it turns out his job is to make some sense of a household that runs entirely on chaos and either to bring it into order or to just enter the world of their logic and start running by their rules.
Agreed. It's kind of like librarians. We really crave order and we are kind of anti-chaos. But then there are moments where you have to think like a cataloger thinks to be able to find the particular resource that you're looking for. So certainly understandable and courageous for him to leave the US, to go to Italy, to start this adventure, not really knowing the language or the people. So Ms. Ozeki, you have so many wonderful characters in your short stories. Is there one in particular that you think is emblematic of courage and honesty and responsibility?
Yeah, sure. So one of the longer stories in the collection is called Leaf Blower. And I wrote it last fall when the leaf blowers were in full throttle in my neighborhood. And that sound just drives me absolutely nuts. So the story is about a young poet named Mel who's struggling to pay her rent. And so she starts caretaking for her elderly landlords. The husband is a retired professor of Old English, and his wife is an oncologist, a retired oncologist who has Alzheimer's. And Mel lives in a small room above their garage where she sort of amuses herself by learning how to type on the doctor's old manual typewriter. She's lost her mother. She's broken up with her girlfriend. She has a bad paying job writing tech copy for an AI startup. And she's fully aware that the AI will eventually take over the job that she does. And so when she runs low on cash, she starts stealing books from the professor's library and selling them at a used bookstore. Um, she doesn't expect to grow fond of this couple, but little by little, they start to bond over their shared antipathy over the racket caused by these lawn maintenance, machines. I won't tell you what happens. I mean, you have to read the story, but actually, you already have. But in the end, I think in the end, these three qualities, what were they? Courage, honesty, and responsibility, are exactly what Mel discovers in herself, pretty much to her own surprise.
Yeah, I think it's a wonderful story when you see that character's arc, how they start at the beginning and then the things that happen to allow them, to grow at the end. And it's not always what we think or they think.
Doesn't
So
Ruth's book sound wonderful?
All of these
they
books, I can't wait to read them all.
yeah, they are all terrific books. I just can't wait till they're released so that I can talk to them with everybody else and know exactly who your books are going to be handed to, the regular customers that come in that we know so well, that your books are going to just be fantastic. So I am a child of the 80s, right? And it was a time when Viewmasters were popular and you could click and look at an image that appeared three-dimensional, kind of creating depth in what you were experiencing. And so thinking about your stories, they're infused with moments in which your main characters take a moment to kind of pause and reflect on a past memory. We all know that hindsight's 2020, and at the same time, I think our lived experiences influence how we reflect on those moments in the past, which gives it the depth and the complexity that we didn't have at the time. So Ms. Ozeki, I'm thinking in particular about Ships in the Night, and I'm thinking about Baby and her mother who says, we need some distance. You can't write about a place until you leave it behind. Can you talk a little bit about how that statement influences her mom's goal of becoming a novelist?
Sure, sure. Okay, so Ships in the Night is about this 13-year-old girl named Baby, whose mother, Kyan, is trying to write a romance novel. She wants to write a real bodice ripper. And Kyan is a bit of a drifter. She's not very realistic. She jumps from place to place, from man to man, and she takes her daughter into some pretty dangerous and unsavory situations. So the story is really about how Baby comes to see her mother for who she is, and also to love her mother for who she is, and eventually, really step into the role of the adult in their relationship. When Cayenne says we need some distance, you can't really write about a place until you leave it behind. It's really kind of her excuse for not taking responsibility, not staying in one place, not finishing her novel. And I have to confess, it is an excuse that I've heard myself use too. And there is some truth in it, I think sometimes it helps to have some distance from the situation that you're writing about. It creates space and it shifts your perspective. But sometimes too, it's also just an excuse.
Right. Absolutely. Mr. Greer, the great Baronessa, lives in this estate known as Villa Coco, with each room filled with objects she's accumulated over time. And your main character, Jovetti, is assigned to catalog them. This is like a librarian's dream. But anyway, how does she use these objects to tell stories from her past?
Yeah, the advertisement that he replies to is for um, it's actually for an adjutor, like an ancient Roman term for an assistant, which is kind of the way she talks. It's very difficult. And the description is for him to hunt martins and prune roses, and he can't figure it out. But he's trained as an archivist, so he comes believing his job is to catalog everything in the house, and it is thousands of objects, and some are junk and some are valuable. And every one of them inspires a story from her, mostly pretty embroidered um, with lies and fantasy. But one example is that she tells him that in this room, she says there's one object that is worth all the others put together. Um, and but she won't tell him what it is, which kind of amuses her. And so he's trying to guess, and he guesses on the wall is this piece of stone with Arabic script on it. And she says, "Oh no, that's worthless. I was in Morocco and visiting a man of my acquaintance in his palace, and I said I admired this writing on the wall. And so he chipped it off the wall and sent it to me, and here it is, which is really a story of her, of sort of romance and fantasy and adventure. Who knows if that's really how she got this thing? But she's always dissembling, and because she's 92, she has 9 decades of stories to draw from, while still hiding a certain part of her life, which becomes important later on.
Agreed. It's fantastic because I was thinking about the things in the room and how I would try to notice what was valuable and what was not. Ms. Danticat, oftentimes one suffers from a traumatic experience, as Magnolia did, and is able to see almost like their life flash before their eyes or their memories become very clear. How do the memories that Magnolia look recalls impact her as she moves forward after surviving this horrific accident?
Well, I love the Viewmaster introduction to these questions, because when I was a kid living in Haiti, my parents were in New York. They brought me a Viewmaster, and I remember it had like giraffes, elephants, it had animals from a safari, and I remember being like, after a while, I was like, I didn't realize that it came with more wheels, and I wanted all the wheels. So I have really great memories myself of Viewmasters. But I think in a novel with where someone is in an extreme situation like Magnolia, it's I think that the balance becomes then how much actually memories do you present. And it was certainly a challenge in the book of not front loading too much, and that notion of like having your life flash before your eyes, but not all your life, in fiction for the pacing of it. So the revelations coming gradually, I think that's what unfolds throughout the book. Her also choosing, I think it's a wonderful way, like even both my parents, when they were dying, had that same, when we talked about dying, they talked about sort of how, like what you let go and what you hang on to. And it's a kind of filtering towards the end, and you realize what's important. And I think that's also what happens to Magnolia. Not that she dies, but she comes close enough that she kind of commits to spending the rest of her life sorting out what to keep and what to let go.
Yeah, there's a beautiful line in your story where it says, "A moment in time is never the complete picture." And that's essentially all of your stories resonate with this, that we think we have a snapshot of something and that it explains everything, but not always the case. Each of your main characters is on a journey, and as readers, you have taken us on the journey with them. How do the relationships with their family alter the course of their trajectory in life? And we'll start with Mr. Greer.
Well, we never meet his family, but we do have a sense he's had a sort of unfortunate time in college and has had to pull himself together. And his parents, who were both scientists, as mine are like, I'm glad, it's time to take life seriously. And so that's why he accepts the job, because he thinks what could be more serious than Europe? Um, and of course, he arrives at the least serious place, it seems, that you could possibly get to. And he's constantly trying to follow his parents' orders because they've given him a round trip ticket. Um, and the date slowly approaches when he will take the return trip. And he's trying to see whether this is really the way to take life seriously or whether that's even worth doing at all, because he's with uh, an employer who tries to teach him how to make a funny story out of something. Um, and by the end, I won't give anything away, but he's tempted to let destiny just take him where it will. And the Baronessa does tell him, she says, you have to choose something. The wrong thing, maybe, but you have to choose something.
It's a wonderful line. I did pull that out. So thank you for that. And then thinking about Ms. Danticat, Magnolia does some of the third personing when she's interacting with her daughter and, her partner. So talk a little bit about her relationship with her family. And after this, how it's really kind of changed things for her.
Well, Magnolia, like myself, is separated from her parents at different moments in her life, at times emotionally separated from her mother who struggled with mental illness. And so there's always for her an effort at reconstructing her family, especially when her parents return to Haiti in their retirement, and she stays here in Miami and initially in Albany. And then at some point, in the novel, she says it and she realizes that she didn't realize how much she had lost, how unrooted being separated from her family had been, because often, in stories of immigration, and we see a lot of it in the news now, people think sort of like they don't think of sort of the emotional cost of immigration for immigrant families. They think of more of the financial rewards, so sort of like what you've escaped, and you're not often allowed to even say what you've lost, right? Because you should be grateful. And so, she, with all that's happened to her, is still also trying to remake her own family with her partner and her child, but also this family that she was born into, and that like her partner actually grants her because he has a very large family that is very fond of rituals, as I'm fond of rituals. So there are quite a few sort of family rituals and gatherings in this book. But I do think it's something that happens in migration, that we try to remake our families, whether they're people we bring into our families or whether people we already were born into our families, but we try to make you have to make a new family in a way in order to survive.
Yeah, I think that's so well said and so appropriate to offer us that perspective at a time when lots of people are immigrating. And I think sometimes we forget, not only all the things that you gain with the new opportunity, but all of the things that you have left behind. And how do you maintain that sense of connection with the family and the loved ones that you have left behind?
Yeah.
Ms. Ozeki, I'm thinking in particular about one art and the term imminence, that this impossible, unnameable thing was on the brink of becoming and it would change everything. Can you
Yeah.
talk a little bit about that and how it relates?
Yeah, sure. Well, One Art is the story of this young uh, college student who has fallen madly in love with her English professor. And her professor is a professor of Old English, and they're reading Beowulf together, and the it really is a story of first love, not just of the professor, but everything that the professor embodies. All of the knowledge, all of the stories, all of the language, just that sense of, the world opening up, the world of literature opening up, the world of history opening up, and of course the world of her heart opening up as well. And so, the moment, well, that I don't know how much to say because I don't want to give it away, but that moment that you describe, that moment of imminence, happens at a turning point in their relationship where the girl the girl has gotten in trouble at school and doesn't want to, isn't really able to go back to her dormitory, and so the professor gives her the key to her apartment, and suddenly, again, the world of possibility breaks open for this girl because she feels that she has been chosen, and that, that everything that she had possibly imagined was now on the brink of becoming. And, I mean, I wrote that story. I now am teaching I came back to Northampton, Massachusetts to teach at Smith College, which was also my alma mater. And walking around campus, seeing all these beautiful young women, obviously falling in love with everything, falling in love with the world, falling in love with language, falling in love with each other. It just made me think back to that time. And especially now, it's the spirit, it's the season of imminence, right? The buds are about to burst. And so I just wanted to try to capture that somehow. And also, I should mention that the story is told in retrospect, and the girl is now an adult herself, and she's starting to have memory issues. So she is trying to recall to the fullest of her ability these memories from her youth.
Right, and find some way to kind of preserve them to go back to. I
Yeah.
think we all want to do that. There's moments where we've all caught ourselves and said, oh my gosh, I just want to savor this moment and I never forget it. But very rarely do we take the time to jot. Well, you all are writers, you probably do jot that stuff down. So thinking a little bit about connection. Webster's dictionary defines connection as the act or process of using words, sounds, signs, or behavior to express or exchange information or to express thoughts, feelings, etc. to another person. I think as human beings, we all long to feel connected to others. So thinking about what your characters do or don't do that gives them either that sense of belonging or a sense of feeling isolated. And if we start with Ms. Danticat, I think about the line in your book that says, we don't always choose where we call home. Sometimes it's others who decide.
Mhm. Well, speaking of connection, Ruth, my niece Zora graduated from Smith College last year. So so
Oh, how
I was on the campus last year around this time, and they have a very interesting ritual when they graduate, they like put the diplomas in a circle and everybody gives
That's
it to one another. So, and
that's so sweet.
that's a connection right there.
I
Um,
wish I'd known that you were here. I would have come to find you.
Yeah, it was really fun. And I second everything you say about the young women there after spending a weekend. But for Magnolia, I think she's always looking for some type of connection. And even in the community, so she lives in a community that she is helping to gentrify in a way as a realtor, and is always really thinking about like how to connect with the community without being predatory. And of course, I think at the end when you've gone through something very difficult, very traumatic, then you start asking yourself all kinds of questions, and you start with these existential questions like who I am, and then of course the question of where is home follows. And I think a lot of us are asking ourselves that. If I had $1 for everybody who's told me they're moving to Portugal, or that they want a second passport right now. So I think that question of home is being forced on us, certainly. There are people who are waiting to find out if their children will have citizenship, like if they'll be entitled to citizenship as the court is deciding. So it is definitely true that I mean, circumstances decide so much of where we end up, especially these days, and these connections. That's why I think these connections were needing together out of chaos are also so important, of people coming together, whether it's around books or around activism. It's so important because there's so much that's being disconnected, that's being torn apart, that we have to find new ways of connecting, certainly.
Mhm.
Yeah, I think everybody will find ways to connect after reading each one of your books. I think that's the fantastic thing about books for me. Mr. Greer, in your book, there's a quote, a line that says, "Every house and every lover has a fatal flaw." How does that influence your main character's sense of belonging?
Uh, it's a good one to keep in mind for apartment hunting for anyone out there. Yeah. I mean, it's sort of advice I try to give people, which is, what you're hoping is that that apartment's fatal flaw is like perfect for you, like it has a bathroom that's split in two, and you're like, great, because I don't want to share the bathroom with my spouse or something. And if lovers have a fatal flaw, and sometimes they're perfect for you, like they have to watch James Bond movies every weekend, and you're like, that sounds wonderful. Otherwise, it's a deal breaker. Um, and that's some advice the Baronessa gives. The other one she gives about, I think, connection for her is to make a funny story. He tells a story at the beginning of the novel, and she says, "This is not a very funny story," and he doesn't understand why she would say that. And later he realizes, oh, she wants me to. I served her a dish raw, you know, unprocessed, uncooked, with all the emotions that I was feeling about it at the time. And she wants me to, cook it for her, so that she can enjoy it, but also so that I can enjoy it, so that I can have gone through it. And I think actually writing a comedy is that kind of process for me because honestly, the story I'm telling you about a young man who goes and is an archivist for a 92-year-old baronessa in Tuscany could be a very serious Henry James novel and not funny at all. And I did go to Tuscany and work for a baronessa, and there were parts that weren't funny, but I did learn how to make it a funny story, to sort of get through the hard parts. In the book, it deals with grief and the passage of loss over the passage of time, and um, intergenerational misunderstandings, and intercultural misunderstandings, and the difficulty of learning a foreign language. But he does learn how to pick out the right details of something that's happened to them and tell them with a sense of humor. And that's a kind of kindness for the listener.
I'm curious, did you go to Tuscany for research or did the novel come out of the trip?
The novel came out of the trip because I took notes every day, and no matter how frustrated I was, I said, I'm going to make this into a funny story. So
Mm.
I have all the notes of like running into a porcupine in the middle of the night, which terrified me at the time, but which was actually charming looking back because I survived it. I think that's the only way that something could be a funny story is if the listener knows you turned out okay. Um, Otherwise it isn't funny. So also the novel is told um like Ruth was saying, like far a long distance. It's a very young man, and he's much older now. And looking back on this foreign creature who was a young man, because the character doesn't know it's a comedy. They're deadly serious about it. But when you're much older, you can look back and say, well, that was pretty funny what happened to me.
Dear reader, I survived to tell the tale.
Exactly. Moby Dick is a hoot. Yeah.
Yeah, humor is a wonderful thing, to read. And there were moments in your book, Villa Coco, where I was laughing out loud. So well done. And I also sometimes think humor is a great way to connect people. It's that icebreaker that allows people just to kind of relax a little bit, instead of feeling that they have to be super on and performing, when they're meeting people for the first time. Um, Ms. Ozeki, thinking about your book, in particular, The Anthropologist Kid, and for brief, moments, I knew exactly who I was.
Yeah.
And talk a little bit about her journey a little bit.
About his journey, you
His
mean?
journey, sorry.
Yeah.
Distracted
Well,
by Bear.
let's see now. So the story is about it's told from the point of view of a young boy who is the mixed race son of an anthropologist father, um, and an Asian mother, a Japanese mother. And I have to say that this is a background that I share. I grew up at Yale University, and my dad was an anthropologist. And at the time, all of the anthropologists, or most of the anthropologists there in the department, had Asian wives, and we didn't call them Asian wives though. We called them Orientals. That was the polite way of of talking about them. So there was this joke at Yale, and these are this joke was told by the wives that in order to get tenure in Yale anthropology, you had to have an Oriental wife, right? And so this was just a memory that I had, and I just kind of wanted to explore that a little bit more, and also to kind of put it into perspective, into the perspective that I now have on that particular attitude, and that particular sort of social configuration. In the story, the young boy, the mixed race boy, Joji, makes friends with a young girl who is the daughter of a colleague of the father's. Her name is Fatima, and she's from the Philippines. And so the two of them become very good friends. Um, and but throughout the friendship, there's a kind of dynamic that grows between them, about, and it's kind of a power dynamic that had to do, of course, with the fact that Joji is a boy and Fatima is a girl, but also, familiarity with the American culture, because Fatima was not born in the States. And so it's really, it ends up being a bit of a comment on how, um, and this is a comment, again, it's told in retrospect. So, the two of them correspond years later. The friendship breaks up, and I'm not going to go into why. But years later, they have one more exchange of letters. And Fatima says something like, that you Americans seem to know who you are, right? That you Americans, that she thought that you Americans know who you are, but you don't. And then she says, "We know who you are." Right. And so it's this moment of kind of coming to terms with that for the narrator, for the young man Joji, who realizes that that she was right, that as an American he thought he knew who he was, but in fact he was nothing like nothing like what he thought.
Yeah, I think it's great talking to all of you, and what I hear in this conversation is that being able to look back on something, whether it's several years later or a week or two later, really changes how we view that experience and then the impact that it has on us, whether we want to look back on it and laugh, whether we want to look back on it and make decisions, for ourselves, that sense of agency that we might not have otherwise given ourselves. So wonderful stories. I'm thinking I'll close with the last question because I was so inspired. I'm going to do this year with the Bonsi tradition from Ms. Danticat's book. That this is really great. That there's a tradition on somebody's birthday after the wish is made and before the first cut of the cake is made. People will recount the thing they're most proud of having done the previous year. And then the next question is what they hope to accomplish in the next. So I think I'm going to ask all of you that same question of what you're proud of accomplishing besides writing these fantastic stories, and then what you hope to accomplish other than being bestsellers with all of these stories. So we'll go ahead and we'll start with Mr. Greer.
I love Edwidge's rituals. I want more of them in my life. That's kind of hard. I I it's too. I mean, one thing is that happened is I got married, but that's not an accomplishment. That's just
Yes, yes, it
Congrats.
is.
It is.
That is
but
an accomplishment.
it's the accomplishment. I married an Italian, and my accomplishment is to have learned Italian to the level to be able to sit at a dinner party and make people think I speak Italian.
Well
It's an
done.
illusion, but I've managed to create that.
Well done.
And what are you looking forward to next year?
Next year's going to be a hard year. Uh, I mean, oh gosh, that's really hard. Um, I think learning Italian is still something that is the biggest challenge in my life. Really being in a different culture and living in a different language is so humbling that I'm looking forward to being able to watch a movie in Italian without subtitles.
Mm,
Go. That's
great goal.
terrific.
Yeah.
Great. Absolutely. Ms. Ozeki.
Yes. Okay. So the thing that I am most proud of this year is that on my 70th birthday, I was able to deadlift my body weight.
Mm.
Wow.
Thank you.
That's
Thank you.
awesome.
Wow.
Yeah. And that was this is my new passion. I am thinking that I will probably stop writing and just become a bodybuilder. And so my it's so satisfying, to lift heavy weights. I don't know what it is about it, but it just kind of thrills me. And I've never been a gym rat, so this is entirely new. And so obviously my goal for next year is to beat that personal best. I mean, I'm hoping to lift 200 by next year.
Mm.
Wow. I'm cheering for you. I think we
Thank
all
you.
are. And can't wait
Thank
to
you.
keep you updated.
Wow. Yeah.
Ms.
Um,
Duncan.
well, so I know a lot of people who are lifting, so congrats and congrats on the marriage, Andy, and Italian. My what I'm most proud of this year is I have not taught full time before, and this is my third year teaching. So I had just had my third year review. So I've done it for a full 3 years. And next year I'm looking forward to both my girls are graduating, one from high school, one from college. And I'm very much looking forward to that. And I would have been, and also that same year, 25 years married. And so all of that I'm looking forward to, and trying to block out all the uh, other things that are not so great about the world.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Oh, what a great note to end on. And I am so excited that you shared this tradition in this book because I plan to adopt it with my family moving forward.
Yeah.
So I want to thank you all for being here and sharing your time with us. Fiction That Resonates was the perfect title for this panel. These talented writers have created beautiful and poignant stories that will make you laugh and cry and be with you long after you have turned the last page. Thank you to helping Thank you all to helping make my job easier by being able to put one of your books and your backlist in the hands of my readers. And then our next concurrent panels are Twisted Fiction and Inspiring Lives. Thank you all so very much.
Thank you for having
Thank
us.
you.
Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much.
And
Yeah.
happy to meet you guys.